All right, at 6:30, I'm going to call the January 7th Pembroke School Committee meeting to order. Would you all join me in rising for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Was there anyone that wanted to address the committee? Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. Hello,
Hi.
everyone. Good evening. I wanted to speak with you all.
For the record, just
yes,
state,
who I am.
Who you are, but state your name.
My name is Paige Graziano. Last meeting, when I was here, it was extremely difficult to hear. And I know that this is something that's been brought up over and over and over again. For those who are at home and aren't aware, as I wasn't for many years, the microphones in front of these lovely people do not amplify for people in the room. So it's really important that as elected officials, people feel comfortable coming to this meeting, that when you're speaking, you recognize that you're speaking to an audience of people who elect each of you. Excuse me. And it's hard to have people come in when they come in and then they can't hear the business of the meeting. So last week I was tempted repeatedly to say, pardon me, I can't hear. Pardon me, I can't hear. And I probably would have interrupted every 2 to 3 minutes. So what I've done is today I've brought these little cards. And it's just a simple way to hopefully not disrupt you guys, but to make it clear, I don't think you recognize how often what we hear is sound like this, yeah. And you can't hear or understand a word of what's going on while you're sitting out here. So please don't be offended if I lift it repeatedly, but if you could just make note and then speak a little louder. And remember that although you are speaking to one another in this room, you're also speaking to the community, and we need to hear you. So hopefully this is helpful and it's not seen as a down thing, but we really want to hear what you have to say. We have a really important year coming up budgetary-wise, you know, figuring out how we're going to finagle this, and it's important that people be able to hear.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the feedback. I don't know that that's ever been my problem, but I will make sure that to the extent we can, that you can hear folks. Thank you. Anyone else?
I just wanted to say thank you to Paige for bringing that to our attention. You know, we have hearing issues in my family, and not that you're mentioning hearing issues, but I respect that as something to make sure that it's accessible for everybody, so thank you.
Any adjustments to the agenda? No. Any communication? So the bills have been circulating and are in process of being approved. Can I get a motion to accept the school committee meeting minutes of December 17th as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Katrina, seconded by Allison. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? It's unanimous. Natalie's not here. I don't know what to do.
Natalie is not here, but she will listen to the recording.
So we did have a lot of work that was done around school committee goals. And Allison, I'm actually going to turn it over to you. I know you were doing a bunch of work on this.
Yeah, so I've met a couple times with Erin and Mary Beth trying to figure out how we can make this work for, I think, what we've talked about, what we were hoping for, and kind of what we landed on is we need a strategic plan. So Erin, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so you all have articulated some areas or objectives you'd like us to look at, but as we discussed at the meeting on December 17th, a lot of these are action steps, things that are outside of even your ability to support, other than supporting them through budget and policy changes as we go through. And I think, you know, in talking a little bit with some of you outside of the meeting, I'm not sure you even all define success in these areas the same way. So Allison and I have probably spent 6 to 7 hours looking at and refining all of the feedback that came in each time. And at the end of the day, I really feel like your energy should be put towards, you know, an 18-month goal of a strategic plan. And then these pieces filter into that. Obviously there are ideals that we have as far as communication, achievement, social, emotional wellness. We'll continue to give you updates in those areas as you're working on the strategic plan, but I do think that this is probably the best use of your time and energy at this point. We have never had a strategic plan in the 15 years that I've been here. We did obviously get into a cycle where the committee very rarely turned over. And so I think that some of it was understood and inherent. But as we start to welcome new folks to the committee, over the years, I think it's important that you all share some vision. And that work, I think, is really probably the best use of time.
Yeah.
And we looked at what other towns have done.
Right, there's not a lot of towns that have published school committee goals on their websites. There are, obviously, everybody kind of leads with their strategic plan, and most districts around us have either just completed or are in the process of completing a strategic plan. And in the handful of places where you do find goals, so Carver Public Schools, Milton Public Schools, they're more like ideals, right? Like we strive to communicate and be collaborative with the community. Those are wonderful goals, and we could do a statement like that if people feel like that's necessary for something on our website. But it really is the strategic plan that drives the work of the committee. And then we've talked about how it filters you to me, to building principals, to teachers, to staff. I think we're just missing that first building block.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Last time, obviously, I'm in favor because I brought it up at the last meeting. But I'm just wondering, is there an economical way to do this? Because I know it's costly, right?
Yeah, so there's obviously, you can get a soup to nuts plan where somebody comes in, works with you all as a committee, does all of your focus groups, does all of your surveying, does all of your data, does all of your writing. As wonderful as that would be economically, that doesn't make a lot of sense for us. But DESE does have kind of a branch that does some of this work, and the cost with that type of scope is really just for the facilitator for the day or two to work with you all, and then they give us the tools to do the rest of it ourselves.
Any idea of what it costs?
So in talking with some districts around us that have either used DESE or Teaching Learning Alliance, which is a very similar group used pretty frequently on the South Shore, if not in all of Massachusetts, it would be about $3,500. So it's not an outrageous price point. But I do think, if you already had a strategic plan and we were looking to update it, that's something that we could probably do 100% in-house, but we don't even have a starting point. So once you do this, then I think in 5 years when you're updating it, it would be even less of an economic factor.
Okay.
Other thoughts, questions?
This sounds like a great idea. I'm just wondering about, for the public to understand, what's the benefit of having this strategic plan? What improvements might we see with having something like this?
So it gives the public a voice in the process as well, right? So if there's focus groups, there's identified objectives, it gives people a chance to weigh in. It gives the public, which seems so weird to say to the 3 people that come to our meetings, the opportunity to hold us slightly more accountable than they could at this point, right? I know that people know what we're working on, but it isn't necessarily articulated somewhere. And so when we first started talking about goals, we talked about, is there some kind of like quick quarterly report card that we can kind of give you all on, here is the progress towards what we've articulated as what we're working towards. I think this gives them more of a more transparency on what we're working on, as well as an opportunity to ask questions if it isn't going where we said it was going to go in the time frame that we said it was going to go in.
I also think, right, one of the benefits of a strategic plan is it's providing a multi-year vision. So this isn't about, here's what we're going to get done in the next 3 months, right? This is about, what is the vision of this committee for this district, for this organization, right? And it's not meant to be super granular. It is a higher level, a small number of goals, usually your mission statement is part of it, sort of those types of things. But you're talking about 3 to 5, maybe 4 to 6 goals tops that you have in there that really says, this is the direction, right? Now we have to be careful in doing that we don't push beyond our purview of responsibility and authority. But exactly, I think to Erin's point, this body is supposed to basically set the tone, set the framework, set the structure that Erin can then take. Her goals are derived from the strategic plan, her administrators, her goals are derived from hers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, it's getting the strategic vision and start.
Yes, and it also sounds like getting everybody on the same page
Sure.
and making sure that we're aligned between the different levels of leadership.
Sure. Other thoughts, questions?
No, I'm 100% for it. I think that our struggles with coming up with goals is because we don't have the plan, so.
Yeah.
In fairness, I think Aaron's right. I mean, as you all know, I sat on this committee from 2007 to 2019, and I was not the longest serving member of this committee, right? So it is definitely one of those things that, with that kind of longevity, folks just knew what it was, right?
Yeah.
But we've also seen in the last 4 or 5 years a lot of fresh blood and new faces, which is awesome. But it's okay. Now where are we going together, right?
Yeah.
Great. So I guess my question is, what's the next step?
So I'm happy to get, I think the cleanest way to do it is to put out an RFP for it and just kind of see what's out there as far as people that are interested in the work outside of those 2 agencies that I know are working with some of our neighbors. I'm happy to just gather some of that information and bring it back to you.
Great.
Maybe not by the meeting on the 21st, but definitely by the first meeting in February.
Any other questions on that? Okay, so I'll turn it over to you. Your
Well,
report.
it's my turn, that's so great. I think there's a couple things under my report. The first thing is Jess's Special Education Department overview. Do you want me to do the other stuff so that I can't miss what's that is?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna we're expecting one of our wonderful Eagle Scout students to come at 7 o'clock to address the committee, so I'm gonna just take a couple of things out of order just so that Jess isn't mid-presentation and he has to wait. So in your packet, you also have an update on the conversation that we had briefly last meeting and in an earlier meeting in October in regards to policy JJIB, which is interscholastic athletics. Patrick, you had kind of asked for an update on where policy sub landed with that.
Yep.
At the last meeting, we shared with you that policy sub wasn't moving forward a change to our current policy, but I did include in your packet a suggested update to our athletic handbook. So, in working with Brian did bring this up at the Patriot League District 9 conference. There is no school in our district that has a policy similar to what we saw with Dayton Rehoboth. He was the first one to suggest that people added it to the athletic handbook, and there seemed to be some great interest amongst the other athletic directors, which is great. So if you look at what you have in your packet, it's on page 4 of our handbook when we talk about general rules of participation. The suggested edit is just adding that participation is governed by policy JJIB, and that no student, athlete, or coach shall be penalized by the district in any manner for forfeiting an athletic contest against an opposing team because such a team includes athletes of the opposite sex, which has always been our practice, but understandably, the concern for getting it in writing was there, so.
So I'm thrilled to sort of see it in writing. I'm curious why policy sub didn't feel adding this to the policy was a good idea or necessary. Or...
I think, I looked at what our comparative districts have done, and overall, it's not in school policies in most Massachusetts schools. So I know part of that is some concern of it being seen as discriminatory and putting it in the policy. Obviously, like at first glance, it's not, but there could be some potential implications. So I think in putting it in the handbook versus making it an official school policy just seemed like it made sense, since we don't need to necessarily be one of the first schools to do something if it's, we want to make sure that we're
I don't know that we're
doing
one of
similar
the,
things.
if Dayton Rehoboth already has it, we're not one of the first schools, obviously.
Well,
right?
I think it's, I did some research and I couldn't find any other schools that have done it other than Dayton Rehoboth.
So my take on it is I don't think the students read our policies. I think they read the handbooks. So I think
True.
more people read. I still don't know how many actually read them, but I think more.
They signed that they.
I know I do, but I don't know
That's fair.
in general. And so I think by having it in the handbook, that's what's more easily read by more people. Personally, that was part of.
Can I?
Yeah, I'm going to go to you. I'm going to go right down the line. Go ahead.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah, please.
So I was thinking, could we, I don't really worry too much about what other districts do necessarily as long as we're staying within the law, obviously. And, you know, I kind of feel like it would be helpful to have it in as a policy so that not just students, but everybody knows that this is a rule, you know, and that maybe we reference it in the handbook.
I hear that. I wonder if we could get our legal counsel's opinion on that and the risk for adding that piece in, because I did find some sources online that talked about a potential legal risk for schools that add it as a policy. So I'd want to get legal counsel on that before I would add it.
I'd be okay with.
So,
Right, I'm happy to get Joe's opinion. In this sentence aside, I just want to remind you that we have a policy on how policy is written and implemented, and if a recommendation doesn't come from the policy subcommittee, you all have to take a different vote in order.
but the
to
recommendation is coming from the policy subcommittee to put it here.
And not in the policy, right.
Right.
So.
But that's, so hold on. So I do want to talk about that a little bit, right? Because I'm happy to, if we need to vote to suspend the policy, we can go that route, but I don't think we do. My request was for policy sub to go back and to look at the policy and make amendments if needed to the policy. What policy sub, in response to that request, is coming back and telling us that their recommendation, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so if I get this wrong, please tell me. That their recommendation is to not change the policy, but instead to put this in the handbook. What we vote on is going to be in direct response to what policy sub is bringing us back as their recommendation.
I just worry that policy sub didn't bring you a recommendation to amend a policy.
No, but what they did is they said, our recommendation is not to amend the policy.
And what I hear you saying is we still want to amend the policy.
Well, I don't know what we're saying yet, and I haven't even heard from David, and I haven't actually given a point of view on it yet. But what I'm saying is, we're having the discussion about the policy is what is on the table, and is what, and so.
Not for voting tonight, though. This
So-
is just an update on, right?
No, it is, because
You can't vote on it tonight
It's
because
the
it's not
handbook
written as a
language.
first read.
my request, right? My request was for the policy subcommittee to go and address the policy and add language,
Yep.
right, similar to Dayton Rehoboth, to protect our female athletes from injury or getting hurt and playing with people from the opposite sex.
It's to
In-
protect
in-
all of our athletes.
in being, well, it's not, actually. You're not
It is.
protecting, but a male athlete is not going to be, fine. We can protect all athletes, but the reality is, the athletes at risk, and what I said at that meeting, were our female athletes, which we saw in this past year with a field hockey player getting smashed in the face with a field hockey ball from a male athlete playing. And my concern was, I wanted our coaches to know that they could forfeit that game without repercussion.
Which they know. They already knew that without a change to the policy. That has always been our practice. It has happened at times for safety reasons that we have forfeited games.
So policy subcommittee has come back and made a recommendation to not change the policy. We can agree with that or not agree with that.
Right,
So-
but there's nothing on here to vote tonight. So I'm not asking you to vote for a change or not change in the policy or to vote for an amendment to the athletic handbook. Because the second piece of the conversation is that this would be included with all of the edits to the athletic handbook when you get handbooks in May for approval. I'm not asking for it to be updated mid-cycle. So there's not an action item on the agenda for you to vote on tonight. That's,
So we're not going to update the athletic
you know, it's an
handbook.
update on where the words, yes, it would have to be a consideration of a first read if I was putting it on there for you to vote.
Can I
Or
mention
fine.
something? Because we're kind of, I feel like doing this a little out of order. Like, this really should have come to policy sub, right?
But didn't it?
So, not like this. So we, at our meetings.
Huh?
No.
No, it didn't.
No, we said that
but
the
we-
language would go in
No,
the
so
handbook.
well, I know, so hold on. So at our meeting, at the subcommittee, we wanted to hear from Brian and hear what his suggestion would be.
Yeah.
And then we haven't had one, and then this came to this meeting. So policy sub hasn't seen this. We were looking at, doing basically this based on his recommendation on how we put into writing our current practice, right? Like, we currently do this, and we want to have it in writing. And so the idea was, when the whole handbooks get reviewed, which we do in the spring, that this would be included in, you know, any other red line
I got you.
versions.
That's
So-
actually helpful.
So,
I'm glad
so
you
to,
clarified
so that is, this was, I guess, an update on the previous conversation.
Correct.
So
but it
you'd still
hasn't-
have the meeting in
Correct.
policy sub and talk about adding
Handbooks,
language.
yeah.
Correct. So this, I think, was just a general
So-
update on an update.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll get to that, and I want to try and clarify it for people at home in a second, but David, I'd like your thoughts on this.
I can't lie, I'm a little confused of policy handbook, you know, the whole 9 yards here. But I think, to point similar to Katrina, I think you're gonna see more schools going, Dayton, Rehoboth, you know, in that direction of saying it's okay to forfeit. The big question comes down to a lot of these people is, does it count against you in the win-loss? And then, you know, playoff implications, and do you miss by a game because you forfeited a game? And that's a whole.
And it does count
It does-
against
that's
you.
the
Right,
Right.
but that's what I'm saying, it's a whole thing with the MIAA, and, you know, I'm trying to think of any other sport this could affect. I know there's co-ed swimming, but I don't, you know, see a lot of violence in
Yeah, I
co-ed
don't either.
swimming.
We have
Volleyball.
volleyball,
I would say it would be volleyball,
field
this,
hockey.
The girls have been on football teams, I believe, right?
Girls have been on football teams. There's been times where we haven't had enough girls for a hockey team, right? There's definitely been instances where there's,
But the girls
Oh,
are playing in boys
yeah, when I was
hockey.
putting girls in the football thing.
right, but so
and they're
the
not playing
reverse is also true, right? So
tackle
we're
football.
talking about protecting girls, but there's often our male wrestlers are not interested in wrestling female
Oh,
wrestlers.
100%.
So they're
I
forfeiting
agree.
for that
I
reason, right?
totally
So-
agree with that. That is 100% fair.
Right, so
It-
the language is, we gotta think about it both ways,
No,
right?
no,
It's
so
not,
no, it's got to protect all those,
Right.
all the kids.
Right.
That I totally agree with.
I
But
think all this is really saying is that we're not, as a district,
And we don't
we're
now.
not penalizing
And we don't
anybody. No coaches are going to penalize a student for saying, you know what, I don't feel safe or comfortable or whatever it might be for whatever reason. That's all we're saying.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate, though, if I can, not that I don't
no, go.
agree with you, but what do you do with the parent who says, oh, we forfeited the field hockey game against XYZ school, we now missed the playoffs by one game, because this is your, you know, dumb
that's coach's
policy?
discretion, right? That's.
Yeah, well, I mean.
Well, I'm just saying,
would you
I
say
think you have to be prepared for the
safety-
blowback on that.
Yeah,
And-
I think we say safety is more important. Students
Yeah.
and parents' feeling of safety is more important than
I'm
any high school sport.
100% agree.
I think, so, I have two things that I'm going to throw out there, right? So, I think the language is great, that you guys want to, this is my personal viewpoint is, I think the language that you guys want to add to the handbook, I think is great, right? The policy supersedes the handbook. And so in my view, this is my view, I think it should be in both places. It should be in the handbook and it should be in the policy. So so what I'm hearing is the request that I made as a member of the board for a policy subcommittee to go back and bring a recommendation back still hasn't happened.
Correct.
Okay, so
You were looking for them, you were wondering why policy JJIB wasn't on the list for approval the last time, and what we had said was that they
No,
weren't moving anything.
I got
forward.
it. So I'm with you there. I thought this was in lieu of the policy piece, which is why I was a
We've
bit
been waiting
confused.
for, you know, like Brian to have a chance to discuss this.
Makes
We
total
didn't
sense.
have, we
No,
hadn't
no.
gotten anything yet to even review.
It makes
That makes
total
sense.
sense. You guys are doing your due diligence. You're trying to figure out what's there. You're doing what you think is right. So I guess my question would be when, I'm in full support of this language being in the athletic handbook. That's my personal viewpoint. I would still like the policy subcommittee to come back with an actual recommendation, whether it's, we're recommending not changing, we can have that discussion, we're recommending making a change and the language should be X, we can have that discussion and figure it out, but
Yeah, we
I
could do
would
that
like
before
to
the
close the
21st,
loop
yeah.
on that. And whether it's the 21st or February, it's okay, and I totally
Because I
understand your
want to
point of view.
move both at the same time, so that's where I want to make sure that we're.
So we're not moving edits to the
Well-
athletic handbook in January or February, because there's extensive edits that need to happen today.
So that's the question, like, would we need to,
We could vote on the policy and recommend that this come back in the athletic handbook with other revisions.
I understand.
And the handbooks come to the full school committee, not to policy.
They come to policy sub first, because the handbooks
They
are
do.
considered a policy.
Yeah, they do.
But like with the athletic handbook in particular, the edits are worked on by a group that includes students, parents, teachers,
Right,
administrators at the high school. So that work isn't fully completed yet for the full handbook.
And I know we talked about, I can't remember if at the full meeting or not, but having the handbooks done
Earlier,
before
yep.
the link is sent out to register
Yep.
students.
So it's on our radar for May. That was what we had planned on.
Okay, so just to recap to make sure we're all on the same page, because this did get a little confusing. The language that we have here is a potential edit for the athletic handbook. I'm just going to say spring, whenever that is, right? In the spring. You guys aren't finished with your due diligence. You're still going to meet to have a conversation about the policy, which was my question or my ask of policy subcommittee. It may come back the next meeting, it may come back a meeting in February, whatever you guys can do. I don't think there's an absolute rush on that. And then we can have that discussion there on your recommendation.
Sounds good.
Perfect, thank you.
Do you want to go to
Camden's here,
Camden?
yeah. Do you want to do it?
Yeah, I do. So I see Camden Hawks and his mom have arrived. So about a week ago, Camden let a couple folks know that he had finished the Gaga Pit at Bryantville. First of all, Camden, it's awesome. I got to play it for the very first time. It looked very awkward, and I did not do well, but you were very kind in not making fun of me too much. He did a fantastic job, but one of the things that Camden did, and again, this came from him, was he asked for the Gaga Pit to be dedicated to Maddie Straub and Karen Boyle. And I think it was a very genuine and a very heartfelt thing that he put out there. There is a possibility that we may add one other name to it. That family has not gotten back to us, so I'm not even going to broach that at the moment, but it is possible that there would be one other name. What unfortunately Camden, just in his heart doing the right thing, didn't understand that we have a policy around this. A lot's coming back to policy tonight. There is a commemoration policy that has a list of requirements in it. One of the asks that I had is, how have we handled something like this in the past? And we did suspend this policy one other time for
Yep, so in December of 2020, we suspended the policy at the request of the teachers at North Pembroke Elementary School because they wanted to put a stepping stone in the Peace Garden out front in recognition of David Summergrad, who had recently passed away in his service to this building and the impact that he had on students and staff here. So you all did suspend this policy so that they could dedicate the Peace Garden out front to David.
So the other thing that I will throw out just for the committee's consideration, and then I'm going to recognize Camden to speak on sort of his thoughts and his motivations and why. I don't know if you had the speech that you wrote that day. It was beautiful. But the Gaga Pit is not a permanent structure, right? So it can be removed. It is not a building. It is not a room in a building. It is, I would consider, a temporary structure on school grounds that the kids are using for enjoyment and play. No disrespect, Camden, to your work at all, but it is not a permanent structure. It's easily removable. That is very different than naming a permanent structure, I think, within the district, right? So it's just something to think about. But Camden, would you just like to tell us your thoughts and what have you? Yeah, that's
Just
fine.
reminding you, Camden, that the microphone only works for people at home, so you're going to speak loud if you want everyone in here to hear you.
All right, sounds good. My name is Cameron Hawks. I am a Pembroke resident. I attended Bryantville Elementary School and PCMS. I am currently a senior at Silver Lake Regional High School in the CT program. The program I do is automotive. I'm also attending Cape Cod Community College in the Aviation Maintenance Technology program. I am a current Life Scout in Troop 105. For my Eagle projects, I built the Gaga Pit. But in September, I was playing the final touches of my Eagle projects, and two amazing people died, Karen Boyle and Maddie Straub. I figured as I was building it that I would put the memory in them. I know Mr. Boyle has been such a big help with everyone in their Eagle Scout projects, so I figured he would deserve something like that for all his help, and his wife. His wife was very nice. And Maddie Straub also had such a big impact on everyone's lives at Silver Lake and Pembroke too. I mean, she went to Pembroke Elementary with me, graduated with me, went to Silver Lake High School. Sadly, did not graduate with me, but two very amazing people. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Camden. Anybody have any questions for him? So, thank you. And it takes a lot to stand up in front of a committee like that, so I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you. You have a seat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that Camden had mentioned when I was there for his initial sort of giving the Gaga Pit to Bryanville was, Karen raised an awful lot of money for the schools and did a lot for kids and did a lot for kids' enjoyment and what have you. And I think it's, he felt as though that, on top of everything else that Karen was for the community, that it was very fitting. And then, as he said, for Maddie, who also attended elementary school here, had an impact on him personally. That is why he chose those two people. So my ask, and it is my ask, by the way, is for us to suspend policy FFA commemoration. That does, I just want to remind you, take a 4/5 vote, and then I will make a motion to allow the dedication. I just want it to be flexible enough so if the third family does agree, that we're able to add it, something for the Gaga Pit. So my motion is to suspend policy FFA commemoration.
Second.
So it's a motion by myself and a second by Sue. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? It's unanimous. So then I have a motion to allow Camden to make a dedication in a commemoration of the Gaga Pit for Karen Boyle, Maddie Straub, and a potential third student who passed from Bryantville per their family's agreement.
So moved.
Thank you. So motion. Was that you?
Second,
Yep.
yeah.
Motion by Sue, seconded by Katrina. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? It's unanimous. So you can put the plaques up. So, and you need something signed.
I think-
Right?
Camden, if I could just say publicly to you, your mom, I know Walter's not here, thank you. Karen would have been thrilled. Well, full-time job watching over me.
A full-time job.
And also, I think it's,
Angel light watching over them,
Oh,
but I will totally add this. Even though they were different scouting trips growing up, your house must have been filled with popcorn because that woman not only bought, we weren't even in the same Boy Cub Scout troop. She, every time she saw Camden, she bought popcorn, bought whatever he was selling for scouts. And I'm like, your house must have been so.
Well, Melinda, she then turned around and sold it to me at a markup.
well, I have to say, like, having it be an Eagle Scout project
Yeah.
really is,
Fitting.
yeah,
Full
it's so
circle. I
fitting, full
agree.
circle, and that's why it's kind of the perfect.
I agree.
To my colleagues, thank you. That's, I wasn't sure if I could vote or if I had to abstain, but I said, well, I'll vote and see
You
if someone
could have
challenges it.
done- You could have done either.
Oh, okay.
I was not voting no on that. No. There was no way.
Thank you, Katrina.
I actually appreciate it too. Thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great job, Camden.
Thank
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, out of order, but back to the first thing in my report is the Special Education Department overview that we discussed a little bit at our meeting in December, just, the desire to learn a little bit more about the SPED department, goals, philosophy, some of the data points that help us define whether or not things are moving in the right direction or not. So I'm going to turn it over to Jess. She's going to remember to use her teacher voice, and we're going to go from there.
Okay. I don't see any orange cards yet, so I think I'm good,
right
but.
Flag on the flag, flag on the flag.
So just based on, obviously, as Erin mentioned, some of your requests about, obviously, how we use data and make decisions, I really focused kind of the overview both on performance of the department and then compliance. So thinking about kind of sharing our philosophy and mission as we developed more alongside of our team chairs. So the special ed department, obviously I head that. We have special education team chairs in each of the building, and then obviously they oversee teachers and support staff, paraprofessionals, et cetera, at the building level. So in line, obviously, with our district mission, we are fostering an inclusive environment, obviously supportive where all students, regardless of ability, can be successful. Thinking about every student, we think about making sure that all students have high quality education and meeting their unique needs. So when we think about special education, we often talk about those individualized needs and specialized instruction in order for all students to be successful. Obviously, we prioritize students' interests and strengths and needs of the students. You heard me previously this year talk about the new IEP and the shift really in that student vision. So that kind of aligns in general with our vision of, you know, putting students' needs first and making sure they understand kind of we are in line with their needs as well, while fostering their sense of belonging for our community in Pembroke Public Schools, and then ensuring all students have access as much as possible to that inclusionary setting. So we know from research and benefits and data that inclusive settings not only fosters academic growth, but also that social emotional wellness as well. So specific to this year, our department goals, as I keep mentioning about that new IEP, it's really focused on involving families at the table with the new IEP. We spent a lot of time, our meetings are quite lengthy this year, and just making sure whether it's a virtual meeting or in person, families are receiving either a hard copy or virtually we are sharing kind of our screen and virtual meetings and going through either draft IEPs or even blanks so that families understand kind of the changes between the old format and the new format, and they understand kind of their involvement as far as, you know, going from that student vision, making sure they're an active participant in that kind of our vision as we create an IEP for their student. Overall, educating as we continue to educate our broader school community. That first picture on that cover slide, we have expanded our, calling it unified sports, but they're also doing some fine art activities at grades 5 and 6 at Havelmock. So our students in the programs and peers began a unified sports club after school this year. It is in cooperation with our middle school program. So once a month they meet individually and then together, so they alternate between going to Havelmock and then at the middle school. And then those younger students will be able to observe and start to participate even in that unified, we do basketball more often than not at the middle school level as the season continues, so that's about to start. In addition, Donna McGarrigle is working with a couple different representatives and agencies on starting sensitivity training. So it came up, I believe she talked about it at school committee in her school improvement plan with her school council, student council, I should say, and came up about receiving some education for students on sensitivity training, inclusivity, diversity. So as she works through that process, we hope to expand that training as we get feedback from her. We have expanded training this year on another specialized reading program. So for, as you guys have heard us talk about, we implemented UFly, that foundational reading skills program at the elementary level in special education when students are unable to access or make progress. With general education curriculum and programming, we often have to do something different. So we talk about specialized instruction in reading. Orton Gillingham is one of the programs in Wilson that we've had for a number of years. We have seen some small successes with individual students using LIPS, which is Linda Mood Bell. And so we've expanded that training in PD actually up to 8th grade with our teaching staff. So that's students are now able to receive a different kind of approach. It's more auditory and visual. It relies on movements of their mouth and sounds. So that's another focus area. And then supporting students, just as we talk about, the new IEP really focuses in a larger part of incorporating a transition plan, that secondary readiness, whether it's vocational skills, independent living, and then for students who are with us post 18. Our new transition coordinator has expanded some different opportunities and partnerships. One in particular is with CVS at their corporate office, and some of the trainings, students are going into Boston on the train, going into that headquarters. So that's been a great addition this year. So for tonight, I just took the feedback from what I heard from you guys about how, again, data, how we receive data, how we analyze data. So I wanted to look at kind of the federal and state oversight, some of the data that is collected, some of the requirements that we submit to DESE, some of the ratings that were given, and then kind of the internal data that we also collect through just internal building-based data, IEPs, et cetera. Kind of key overarching questions: how often do we analyze? How we use data to inform decision-making and programming? What do we see as areas of strengths within the data? Any areas of improvement? And then really just our next steps. So just big picture, Massachusetts reports to kind of federal agencies regarding IDEA. So Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requirements require states to submit plans that they have an oversight on local districts regarding performance and compliance. So there is a number of what we call indicators that districts have to report to state, so to DESE on in a number of different ways. And you'll see throughout the report, the presentation, and in your packet, there's a couple different ways, and they kind of rotate through what they're collecting data on and when. Just for your own kind of reading purposes, I don't plan to go through all of this, but just wanted to include all the indicators. They do rotate, as I mentioned. Some are collected every year. We do collect early childhood data and outcomes on an annual basis now, as well as transition secondary students kind of transitioning and kind of their outcomes on a yearly basis now, and the rest are kind of on a rotating basis, everywhere from meeting timelines to least restrictive, looking at disproportionality, making sure that we are all our representation as far as categories, and there's no biases with race, suspension, dropout rates, etc. Assessment, graduation, dropout, just thinking, and then what we call dispute resolution. So you've probably heard me talk about not only the tiered focus monitoring, which is in this presentation, but also our problem resolution system, which is an avenue for families to make complaints, not just in special education, but really any regulation that DESE has an oversight on our district. If families feel that something is not being met, we are out of compliance, they have a system to make a complaint. There is a process where we submit reports, kind of our side to the story, and then someone makes a decision. And how we use that data is really, being reflective. If we are out of compliance, what can we do differently? What can we change to ensure compliance going forward? So this data is a little bit old. We do receive what's called special education determination in January, so we should be receiving the 2024 determination. We should be more towards the close of the end of the month, so this is a little bit old as far as 2023 last year. They do use a combination of between 2021 and 2023 data to look at performance and compliance. Really focusing in on that student outcome regarding students with disabilities. So kind of criteria, again, that performance and compliance, what indicators are collected, what kind of data arrives to one of these categories. So meeting requirements, needing assistance, needing intervention, and needs substantial intervention. We have been found in 2023, similar to years past, since I've been in this position for as long as I can remember, we have been meeting those requirements. 2023, all of the indicators and areas are on the slide, and they do, and I did include a lot of the rubric pieces, just for your kind of understanding, and some live links as well. Some of the things I just want to point out that as a SPED department, we pulled out data, so we look at this anytime it's obviously given to us. So in January, I'm meeting with team chairs or meeting again with special ed departments at the building level to kind of go over this, talk about trends, what can we do differently, so that we are, using this to inform kind of our decision making. A couple of the things that stood out as kind of successes, as far as earning points, each of the rubric points, there is a rubric of 4 points. Some are, as you can see, time and a half, or 1.5%, and then a double times 2. Some of the areas that, just thinking about successes, our inclusionary rate has maintained about 70 to 75% each year. So each year when I give the special ed budget overview, I talk about how our students are placed, where they receive most of their education. So the majority of our students are in full inclusion models, with a small percentage of partial inclusion, which is really obviously the goal for us, as I mentioned, not just as a department, but by the state as well, to educate students with their peers as much as they can. So that, I would say, is a success. Our compliance as far as complaints through the tiered focus monitoring, and or things that were cited, which we didn't have any, I'll talk about in a second, as well as that PRS complaint. So there is that avenue, and families do, sometimes contact them about a concern they have, something that wasn't followed, whether it's in special education or another regulation or law. So 2.2%, there is a percentage. We had 2.2 findings based on kind of the average. And then as far as making sure that we corrected that, we fully did that. So we may get something where it says we were out of compliance in a timeline. So they've asked us to do further training. We usually have 1 to 2 findings a year on average. So I would find that a success. We do use that data to kind of change what we're doing and make sure it's good information. And if we're doing something wrong, we like to know, and so that we can make those improvements going forward. I did want to point out that 5-year cohort graduation rate, as it stands out just without kind of understanding that rubric, as yikes, only 64% of our special education students graduate. This is based on what's called a 5-year cohort model. So DESE looks at students starting at freshman year and see if what they look like within 5 years. Have they earned that graduation, that diploma, that competency? So in looking back at the years that they were looking at in 2021 and previously, we did have a larger amount of students that stayed with us post 18. So they are we had a kind of an influx of students in that 18 to 22 population. So they did not earn that competency diploma for a number of reasons. Some students needed more work on transitional skills. Other students were not on that diploma track. They were taking the ALT assessment. So that definitely factors into that. I did include on slide 15, just so we can see it in a second, just the graduation rate, straight rate for the indicator. We are at about 85%, which is, above state rate and what I would consider where we would like to be. So that year we had, sorry about that, there's all the rubrics. There we go. So 19 students exiting were in special education that year, and then 16 received that diploma. So that's about 84.2%, and we met that target. Let's go back, make sure people don't have any other questions. Another area we kind of looked at that as far as standing out was, even though we met the target for performance, so Indicator 3 talks about the discrepancy with students with or without disabilities on MCAS. We did meet that discrepancy, that target, I should say, and earning those 4 points. So they looked at grade 8 reading as that kind of category, but it's still not where we would like it to be. So that's
So the
certainly-
target is about closing the gap. I think those are probably words that you hear more frequently, closing the gap between our students with disabilities and our typically developing students. So they set a target each year for us to hit. It doesn't mean we've closed the gap, it just means we met the target for that year.
And which column is that? I just am having trouble seeing.
3.
It's the third column over.
Let's see if I can
Under
move this.
compliance.
Under compliance. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What page is that one?
No, we're under performance. So
Performance?
it's
Okay.
29 and then rubric points 4.
Oh, okay, got it. And
having
what
a
is
hard
that in
time with this.
relation to, like, is it a total of 4, we got the 4 points, okay,
Correct.
that's out of 4, okay, got it.
It's one there.
Understood. Okay, yeah.
Sorry about that. I know it's a lot of information. So I was trying to highlight some of the things that, as a department, we pulled out for some of the strengths and some of the areas that we still felt that we needed some focus on. Does anybody have any questions before I move on?
I was just wondering about the timely, that 0, I mean, it might be, I'm not sure what the last column, the
Sure.
one under that for timely submission.
Sure. So it's based on the tiered focus monitoring that I'll talk about in a second report. If we had any findings in that, did we submit the corrective action in a timely manner? We did not have any this last round in 2023, so there was none to report. And then in our findings, the 2.2 findings, did we submit corrective action within the time frame given? And we
Yeah.
did. So we didn't have any negative check marks. So we earned the full
Full points.
4 points.
Oh, okay.
So that's corrective
The
action.
zero's good.
Zero.
The 0
yeah.
is good. I was just confused.
Yeah,
because
sorry.
I was like,
So-
I feel like you should get 4
Yeah.
points if you didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
And, okay, I understand now.
And so, just to back up, so you were talking about the MCAS for grade 8 reading.
Correct.
That's on the DESI profile for special education, right?
Correct.
Is that
That's the
correct?
performance indicator
The
that they
performance indicator.
identified.
Their,
Okay.
their accountability target.
And so we didn't meet the other targets, but just the grade 8.
Yeah, so in this sense, looking at the big picture for reporting on IDA to the federal government, they pull out eighth grade, they call it reading, but it's really ELA.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry, struggling here with a clicker. So these are just the rubrics so that you could understand kind of the way they derived at compliance. There's the graduation. And then here's the tiered focus monitoring. So every 3 years, we are required to go through a process. We are broken up into whether we're reporting out on Group A or Group B universal standards. In 2023, we received a report based on Group A. I just was notified this week that we are now going to start Group B, so we're going through some training on that.
They word it in a way like you've won the publisher's
Yeah.
program. Like you've been selected.
I said it to Mary Beth like, woohoo, yay! So
Who
B
decides that,
focuses.
DESI?
Sorry,
I'm
what?
sorry. Does DESI, who decides that? Like Group A? DESI does.
Yeah, so it's based on your tier. So we are tier 1, so we met requirements in all of those areas. So we have what's called a self-directed improvement plan. If we hadn't met it, they would be basically checking in more frequently. But because we are at that top tier, it's every 3 years. I did include a link just in case you want to revisit that report, but Group A at that time focused on some of the indicators as well as what's called a self-assessment. So they're asking me to submit policies, procedures, examples of different kind of special education regulations as well as indicators. They did do, at this time, interviews with administration and staff and CPAC. They had an on-site review of all SPED files, and then there was a survey to families of students with disabilities. So that happened and concluded in January of 2023. It was a 2-year process, so even though they say it's every 3 years, it's like I felt like I just finished this. So we'll move on to the Group B standards soon. And then I know, Katrina, you had mentioned the radar data, so I did want to just pull a couple things from that as we revisited that in preparation for today as far as that performance piece. Similar to DART schools, when Mary Beth presents on the achievement report, Radar allows special education online kind of resource to pull a very similar kind of DART profile. It is more similar demographics to Pembroke in consideration of special education. So they do look at the population and enrollment similarities, but it's really focused in on percentage of students with disabilities. We are at a little over 18%, almost 19%, which is right under the state average. We're kind of in the middle of all of the what I'd still consider DART kind of schools within Radar. Some of the things that kind of stood out as I looked at schools that, and you'll see I put a kind of green arrow on Groton Dunstable, certainly high performing as far as exceeding and meeting expectations with students with disabilities. They are quite above the other DART schools in comparison. So I definitely relied on Mary Beth a little bit to help me kind of dig deep on like, what are they doing differently? Some things surprising, some not. As we looked at the data, as far as their larger category for disabilities was health, which is very unusual. It's not very typical for students that to be, and that is some of our comparison DART schools more in the second or the third most common disability. We fall in that specific learning disability, so I'll say the most common category for disabilities is a specific learning, so a reading or a math disability. They fall in what they consider health disability, which without speaking to people about that, it's just an assumption or a question I had in working with Erin and Mary Beth too, just about qualifying students under health. So that typically does not necessarily mean they have a disability in the area of academics. They may be students with ADHD, medical conditions. Does that mean they don't have a lot of deficits in those academic areas, allowing them to perform better, possibly? So just some kind of analyzing. Sometimes we don't have all the answers to it.
Right, but I think you're leaving off the one glaring thing about Groton Dunstable, right?
Well, I'm also going into the next slide about
Their per pupil, their budget
I know.
is $19 million more than ours for similar.
So the three
It's
things
also like
that,
that more staff.
yeah, right.
Which is helpful when you're looking at the
Right.
data to be like, what are the resources that are
So
aligned
at
to this?
first I was like, yikes, how did they do this?
Yeah,
So I was
what's
like,
that?
Mary Beth, I need some help, like, let's dig. She was like, do you realize their budget is almost $20 million more?
Right.
That was obviously their demographics overall in their town. I started looking at staffing, so just opening their student services page, they have a SPED director, they have an assistant director, they have a district team chair, they have a tier 1, so the layers of intervention coordinator, they have a tier 2 and 3 coordinator.
Wow.
So definitely staffing differences, and that's why I pulled this Radar out, just in comparison with them. Obviously, it's something, as they get into kind of next steps, we're always analyzing, obviously, our staffing needs, our models. It's a noticeable difference as far as.
We're 1 to 5.4 kids, and they're 1 to 3.7 kids, right? So it's a lot.
Right.
I know it doesn't seem like it, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
We're also under the state too, which is not necessarily typical. A lot of times we're above the state, so.
But it's interesting they put them in the same demographic as us.
Right, so remember what Jess said, is that it's a
Yeah.
community that's like us in enrollment, but not necessarily
Socioeconomic.
socioeconomic.
Yeah.
So they're pulling just people that have a like enrollment,
We've
that
been-
for the students with disabilities piece.
And students with disabilities, so similar percentage of students with disabilities, but not necessarily socioeconomic, like.
Right.
In the past, we have matched with Groton Dunstable as a DART school, but we have not matched with them in the past few years. And their DART schools, if you were to look at who they are most alike in terms of general education, like the whole picture, not just taking up the special education population, they're matched with a completely different group of schools than we are matched with, so.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's different. And I mean, resources could be the issue, but there could be 1,000 other issues,
Yeah.
you know? But certainly, that's a lot of money in terms of a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then obviously internal data besides things that are produced, whether it's a requirement or an audit from the Department of Education, we are constantly looking at data internally. Some of the data I present often in the budget presentation, just about, as I mentioned, our full inclusion models, where students are placed in placements. Again, we range between 70 and 74, 75 over the last several years of students, as much as we can to the extent possible, including them in that general education setting. Another thing we monitor internally are rejected IEPs. So once we propose an IEP to families, they have the ability to either accept an IEP, partially reject an IEP, meaning they disagree with a part of the IEP, or the whole IEP, whether that's based on multiple disagreements, they disagree with placement, they don't like goals. So we monitor that. It's definitely the trend this year. We do not have right now a lot of rejected IEPs. So we have ranged in the 30s over, even looking back to 21-22 school year, it was still in that 30s. So that is something I find a success. We've really worked hard with our families to, even if we know there's a disagreement at the table, to follow back up with families even before they're maybe submitting the IEP, or if they haven't returned it, so they have 30 school days to return it before it's considered rejected, but we like to work with families prior to that. So if we're getting close to that 30-day, we're reaching out to say, like, do you have a concern? Do you want to re-meet? Is there something that we can, you know, maybe mediate, come to the middle on prior to rejecting? Or if it is rejected, making sure families understand. Some families ask for a team meeting and others don't, so there is a box to request it. Our team chairs reach out regardless. That's what I've directed the team chairs to do. Please offer a meeting so that we can hope to come, you know, to an agreement.
So what happens? So when a family rejects the IEP, what happens?
Sure. So we send a copy to the Bureau of Special Education Appeals. Families get a letter, and so do we, that they've received it, and then they reiterate their rights. We share procedural safeguards with families at least once a year, but often more than that. Anytime we're proposing an evaluation, if we are denying something, so a family asks for something, we deny it, we make sure they understand their rights. So the Bureau of Special Ed Appeals sends them a letter. We've received your rejected IEP. Here are your rights, whether it's mediation, hearing, you know, making sure you're working closely with your district. I monitor, obviously, those letters as they come in, and we keep track of rejected IEPs. And that's something that I'm working with team chairs when we meet on a monthly basis, like whose IEPs are rejected. You know,
What does it mean for the student and their services?
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
I thought you meant for what if families. So if a family rejects any part of an IEP, if it's not the first IEP, it's called a stay put on the previous IEP. So let's just say we met today, and in a month a family partially rejects that they do not agree that we are no longer providing occupational therapy services. If they reject that, they stay put on the previous IEP or part of the IEP. At that point, we go over their rights, and if we believe or they believe it's a denial of a free and appropriate education, we need to make a decision as a district, or families do, whether we file for a due process hearing.
It is, I think what kills me about the entire process, and it's nothing that we do or anyone else, I think it's across the Commonwealth, this is set up to be an adversarial relationship. It is really difficult, and parents have to advocate for their kids, especially kids that are in need of additional services and additional help. We also have a variety of obligations to the district, right? It's completely understandable, but there's got to be a better way to do this to help kids. I mean, there just does. I feel like this is set up and established to be an adversarial relationship between families and school districts. I really do. And it's a shame because I worry about the kids. That's why my question was, what happens to the child? Because I worry about, people may not agree, but there's still a kid who needs help.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And how does that child get the help that ultimately they need? And I feel like that gets lost in the shuffle,
And-
not just with us, by the way. I'm
No, and
talking
it sometimes
Commonwealth
does.
wide.
I think there are times where parents stay put on goals or a full IEP because they don't necessarily understand they can reject part of it, or they're in full disagreement, and we are stuck not moving forward technically on goals. So if we've set a goal for a student to continue accessing, let's just say, a reading CVC words, and a parent stays put on something, whether it's the service or the goal, we are not technically supposed to move forward.
Right.
So students are supposed to be then continuing to work on the same skills when they're pulled out of the classroom, which is a detriment to kids. So obviously, as curriculum programming moves on, we move on, but taking data is on that previous, say, goal or rejection.
Can I ask a question related to that? So, what's the timeline? Like, if somebody gets a rejected IEP, do you have like a timeline of response, or a timeline, a goal for resolving it within a certain amount of time, or?
So we have to send it into the Bureau of Special Ed within 5 school days of receiving it. If a family asks for a meeting, we have to meet within 10 school days.
Okay.
If they don't, we always encourage them to come back in for a meeting, even then if they're not looking for a meeting, or at least a phone call to talk about like what your objections are, what are your concerns. There isn't a timeline of like, sometimes we have rejected IEPs that go on for a long time. Those are few and far between. I think families seem to have a better understanding of like, here are your rights. I think in years past, some families would stay put in on an IEP, and it would be a 9th grade, and it's like a 3rd grade IEP. We also have to move forward with the Bureau of Special Ed, filing for a due process hearing if we think we're denying a child. So just like you said, if we believe a child needs a service in order to make progress, and a family says no, and we believe that's the right thing, there are times we file proactively. Or if we think we're doing a disservice. Parent says, I believe the child belongs in that substantially separate program, and we're saying, to educate them best, they are able to access. So sometimes it's both ways, so.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing the rejected IEP numbers. I know that's not something you have to do, but it's super helpful to see the growth and progress that's been made with the new IEP form. I think to Patrick's point about, things kind of being adversarial, I do think the new IEP brings families in and students in a way that empowers
That's good.
them.
Good.
And I think we're seeing that in the data, right? Like to see for 39 to 7, obviously we're halfway through the year, but we're halfway through the year almost.
Yeah.
So I do think that's something to celebrate. And it seems like there is some good progress being made with families feeling a part of the process, like you mentioned. One piece I wanted to bring up as well was the point about IEPs. You don't have to reject the whole thing. Like, definitely for families, accept what you can accept. Do not reject an entire IEP if you don't need to, because it just doesn't help anybody. And I feel like there's always something you can accept in an IEP. You can attach a letter, you can write it all. There's not enough space on the notes, generally speaking, but you can write a letter to include a detailed list of those things, and that's, I think, helpful for you. I'm not going to speak for you, but helpful for you to know what's happening, like what's the actual problem here.
It's much more helpful for us to know if a parent's even bulleting what their concerns are or rejections versus like a overall, because when we come to the meeting, we try to streamline concerns. So create an agenda ahead of time. These are the things that you have concerns or rejections on. Let's go through these and see if we can come to an agreement.
So you don't have to completely reject it. You can accept like 98% and then just leave
Yes.
that one. That's good.
There's a box as well, and I know it's something you mentioned and something I've done myself with my own child. is also, I didn't reject the IEP, I just gave some feedback on one piece that the language, I wanted the language to be tweaked on, and then I didn't have to reject the IEP because I just worked with the team. So that's also an option. You don't necessarily have to reject.
And
So,
then-
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's why when we get close to that 30 days, our team chairs are calling to say,
Yeah.
like, do you have any concerns or questions?
Right.
You know, we haven't received it back. Obviously, you have that 30 days, but let us know. Because sometimes it is just small things that we
Right.
can agree to even without a team meeting. So.
So Jess, I'm gonna ask you to take 5 more minutes to wrap up. We have an executive session after
Absolutely.
this and got some time constraints tonight, so I just want to move us
Sure,
forward.
sorry. I know I talk a lot.
No,
Okay.
no, you're good.
So-
It's actually great data.
I
Thank you.
didn't achieve my goal, Mary Beth. So,
Susan, unannounced observation.
We'll give you a 2 out
so
of 4 on the
another
rubric.
highlight, kind of a positive, as I've talked about before, the elementary programs, our district-wide programs at Havemock, we have 2 tracks of program. One is called PACE, which is really a life skills program, and the others are transition programs. Our goal is to transition kids in those substantially separate programs into inclusionary opportunities as much as extent as they can access. In addition, another part of the goal is to transition out of a program into a more moderate, whether it's partial inclusion or full inclusion model. We have been able to transition 10 students over the last 4 years out of substantially separate programs back into that inclusionary setting. I looked back with Ashley Cross this week, just looking at like some of the reasons and what we've done differently over the years. We did add one more strand, one more teacher to that transition program, so we are able to have a K-1 program, a 2-3, and then a 4-6, which has allowed us to have smaller, substantially separate classrooms, more direct instruction, smaller groups, more individualized, kind of that intensive model. So that's been a nice success. Obviously, that number 28 and 18 doesn't fully just reflect those 10 students. Obviously, some kids come into kindergarten and go out to 7th grade as well, but I just wanted to focus in on that elementary piece.
That's great.
Okay. And just, I won't talk too much, just about that ongoing, what we do at the building level, with building level team chairs, monitoring IEP progress and regression data for extended school year, making sure timelines are met. We track behavior data. We look at kind of and analyze trends, whether it's office referrals, disciplinary, and the projected IEP that we talked about. And then just larger scale, between A-Team and SLT, I'm reviewing whether it's information coming from DESE as far as ratings or trends that we're seeing. I meet monthly with the team chairs. Our school councils sometimes have that information, and we talk about school improvement plans, and obviously at CPAC as well. And just talking about kind of closing that gaps, we kind of address some of those things and some the pieces that we do as we consider closing gaps of achievement. Kind of research shows that obviously as we improve the achievement of all students, students with disabilities are tightly linked to that as well. So we talk about improvement plans, just going through obviously how we make changes, using this data, so all these type of data points, obviously making sure that we are doing ongoing assessments, that we're using evidence-based instruction and positive interventions. We work together as teams, and obviously with that family engagement as well. So I just kind of outlined some next steps based on not just this report, reporting of data, but just in general of the things that I'd like to do as a department going forward. As we talked about that, monitoring that reading data, so the impact of our newly adopted UFly program and DIBELS to monitor progress as we work on that core instruction at that elementary level of reading. Our hope is that that has an impact on students that require something different and specialized in reading and special education. I'd like to look more at our curricular programming. We've done a lot of work on our reading programs at the K-8 especially level, but just looking overall at the curricular programs we're using, especially in the area of math for direct instruction. I love that the staffing and the models, obviously going back to that radar data, we analyze and look at kind of our trends and our models and making sure that we have the appropriate staffing to meet our students' needs. And then we had planned to do a survey at the end of the year, focusing a lot on that new IEP training, making sure families felt like they had a voice at the table, questions they still had. In hindsight, looking at just some other areas would be helpful as well, whether it's department strengths and concerns they have, and then looking to staff for professional development needs, questions and concerns that they may have.
Great job, Jess.
Good job.
So
Thank
I
you.
was going to
I know
say.
it's a lot of
right,
information to
The
talk about.
presentation's amazing, like, you put a lot of work into that, and I just
Yeah.
want to say, I really appreciate
Thank
the
you.
amount of
Yeah.
time and energy that you put into that. I do have a bunch of questions, but.
go ahead. Go
Is that
ahead.
okay? Do we have enough time?
Good.
So I did a deep dive into radar, so,
Sorry.
sorry.
Okay. No, it's fine.
I just wanted to understand what I was looking at, because
Sure.
this hasn't necessarily been my strong suit, so I wanted to, like, sort of understand. So I read in there that there's a CPAC interview at some point with, it states some sort of an interview process with, like, I guess
So just mentioned that during the
Yeah.
tiered focus monitoring plan.
So
They
who-
meet with CPAC.
So that's DESI or we do as a school? That's what I was confused, like
So
who?
through the tiered focus monitoring, DESI is a representative, our kind of coordinator for that program met with Tracy Marino at that time, and anyone else that parents were surveyed and reached out. We provide information, and anyone who contacted that representative was interviewed.
They came to one of the meetings.
Yeah, they came for an overview at CPAC as well, to talk about the process, how parents could get involved and provide feedback.
So Desi does it.
So DESI does
Yeah.
it, and so do we get the feedback, and then do you base things on the feedback? Like,
So in general terms, they would provide me if there was like a trend or, and it feeds into some of the indicators as part of that plan, but I don't get specific like survey
You don't get
data
any.
from them.
is that
It
ever
goes directly
something
to
that
them.
we would do as I don't know the answer is, so just
Yeah, so I think
forgive me.
Jess is proposing doing a
Yep,
parent
so I'm
survey.
proposing we've done a variety of surveying, whether it's following, when we mail home an IEP to families about process and concerns. CPAC, it's been a couple years since we've pushed out a survey. I think, probably, I want to say 3 years ago. I often did PD surveys for families. Don't get a lot of responses.
Yeah.
So even through the tiered focus monitoring, we mailed out, I think, well, they do it all, 390, and they got back like less than 30 surveys, so.
Well, it might be helpful, because I think Katrina's got a little in with CPAC these
Yeah,
days, so.
I'm doing their communications. So
Yeah.
we have a meeting on the 27th. If you'd like to come in the evening, I forget the exact time right now, but the other piece, actually, you know what, that's the board meeting. I'll come back to you. There's going to be a survey on the CPAC page to identify the best time to meet. Because our last couple of meetings, actually, we haven't had folks come. So we would love new members of the CPAC. Look out for that survey on Facebook tonight, because now I'm saying it publicly and I must do it.
Yeah,
So-
we've struggled, I think, and Allison can speak to that. We've done a variety of, we had a number of years where we didn't have a CPAC, and I would just do more presentations and professional development for families. We would have 1, 3, 5 parents. Even the new IEP presentation, there was like 10 people. And the CPAC meetings, I know, there hasn't been like
Yeah.
a full, like what we call business meeting in some time, but the last couple, there was nobody but the board members and me, so it's hard to get, and I would agree with Katrina if you're out there listening, like coming to those kind of meetings, because I often, whether I'm presenting on something or not, I'm often asking like, is there questions or concerns? I don't get a lot of feedback from parents at that setting.
I wonder if
so.
there's, maybe somebody could talk about doing a Zoom option for families too.
We've done that. So we did that. Tracy Marino and I started during COVID, but people just don't come. So.
Yeah,
We've
that's too
tried
bad.
Yeah.
a lot. We've tried,
creative.
Bringing food and
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had,
crafts and-
Nicole McDonald brought, it was like, snacks one time, and
We had a sensory-friendly holidays
does
event
it.
that we had
Yeah.
planned. I have a whole, thing that we planned to do, little sensory bottle things, a craft that Nicole was going to do, but we had to cancel it because we didn't have enough people sign up for it. So if you have ideas, you can send them to the CPAC.
So we'll discuss it
So-
on another day, because I know I'm
Yeah.
taking up.
Did you have other questions?
I did, yeah. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on, I was noticing that the state seems to have more teachers than paras, which I thought, it seemed to be I mean, we need paras, obviously, but I'm not saying we don't. But I'm just wondering, is it possible that maybe, we could improve some of our scores if we had, put the dollars toward teachers rather than paras? I don't know if the answer, but
Yeah, I
I'm just
think
wondering.
we've talked about before, when we talk about a co-teaching model, it's an expensive model. So when we're talking about replacing paras with teachers, I don't know, it's 2 paras for every teacher equates to. Students would still need those variety of services. So having a teacher be able to do an inclusion where 3 different paras are going to 3 different classrooms, but then you only have 1 teacher being able to do that.
You
Something we
also-
can certainly consider, but I know
Yeah.
it's an
Yeah.
expensive.
I mean, I don't know what the answer is. It
Yeah.
seems like
I
that's
think-
what the data's showing, so.
But I also think you got to be really careful when you look at the state numbers, because when you pull Boston out, and Worcester, and Springfield, those numbers are going to look very, very different. And again, this
Sure.
goes back to funding,
Right.
right? So the Commonwealth funding formula is to fund the urban districts and to leave the suburban and rural districts to fend for themselves. And that's the funding model.
Sure,
So-
but we do have to hire special education teachers so that we have the
No,
services
no,
here.
but.
And I'm just saying,
No, all I'm saying though is, if a para is a third of the cost of a teacher. So,
Right.
in our funding model, it would be really difficult
That I
to
see,
swap out paras
I
for
definitely
full
see
teachers,
that.
right?
I just,
And, the funding model is grossly broken, but the reality is it's not getting fixed.
Yeah.
The way I heard Sue's question was that would it be more beneficial to add more sped teachers than to add more paras? That's what I
Right.
interpreted your question to be.
Yeah.
Not so much that we're
Right,
replacing
and
them
I
one
think
for
to
one.
that point, we don't have extra paras, so
Yep.
right, so
Totally.
every single para would need to be replaced pretty much with a sped teacher, if that was the model we
Yeah.
were going for.
yeah, I wouldn't necessarily, we should
I
say
don't
we should
think so,
do
yeah.
all or nothing. I was
Right.
just thinking the portion of
Yeah,
teachers
yeah.
versus paras maybe needs to be slightly different in order to have more
Yeah.
range of expertise, maybe? I don't know. I just don't know what the answer is, but it just seems like, where could we improve? So I was looking at the profile on DESE, and, grade 8 reading is great, but grade 10, not so much, grade 4, not so much. So, what could we do to improve,
Those areas.
the outcome? As a
That's
district,
a
where
fair
should we
question.
put our
That's a
funding?
good question.
And we can also take a look, similar to another graph that she had, look at comparable districts, so we don't just have to look at the state, we could look at where we sit within our comparable districts for special education
And
based on population.
I actually, to your point, I actually did that in my deep dive. I pulled up all of the districts that we traditionally look at, all the DART
DART schools,
schools,
yeah.
and it was actually very similar, but one trend that I found was that we're doing well in, one area, other towns are doing well in another. So we're opposite for math and ELA, which I kind of found interesting. Some of them aren't, but there's a lot of districts that are opposite of us, and I'm just kind of curious why. There's more.
Really good question.
Yeah, so what can we do to improve?
With math.
Why are we better in one area than the other?
I
I
think it has
guess-
to do with where we invest, because I know reading was an area that the district has spent a lot of time and energy into improving reading outcomes, and I think the data shows that. And one of the things I heard Jess say was that math is an area that we want to focus on when we're looking at our curricular materials.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is knowing where we need to focus some of the funding based on the recommendations that are coming.
Yeah,
And that's where I also think those questions are great at budget town, right?
Yeah.
Where,
Yep.
where are we making our investments? If we know, to your point, right, okay, we're doing really well in ELA, but we're struggling in math, what are we doing about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, where, maybe we need to shift resources from here to here.
Right.
And so that, I think that data will be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Anything else?
So the post-secondary outcomes, do we have, you talked about, post-secondary, and we try to support families and students. What do we do to try to improve outcomes so that we can get better outcomes other than, I know you did mention a couple of things.
The life skills.
Yeah.
So are we talking students who stay with us post 12th grade?
So I
Or
was looking
18
at
to
the
22?
outcomes for the IEP students didn't meet state targets. So I have that in my
18
notes.
to 22.
And I was wondering how we could improve it. Is there, what are you doing now? Do you have plan, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah,
I'm just-
I want
you
to
have to
look
look at the data point,
Yeah,
yeah.
I want to just make sure I understand that data point.
Yeah, it's
I could
the
certainly
profile on
circle back.
DESI, is what I wrote. I don't know, I was thinking do we
just
need
take a
more
look.
financial literacy classes or job fairs for seniors? I don't know, but
Sure, I can take a look at it. I just want to make sure I'm answering the right,
yeah.
And so
based
are
on the
you-
right
Are you
data.
talking specific to special education students?
Yeah, I was looking at the DESI profile for special education.
Maybe it was
And
the post indicator 14 post-school outcomes.
It probably, do you have additional data that you printed out?
No, I just have
No,
the,
she's looking at the-
Oh, you're looking
I was
at
just looking
the
at the table,
indicators.
Okay.
because that was something that I,
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me, but I
No,
can
that's
certainly
okay.
look
That's
into
okay.
that.
So I'd look into it, and then maybe even during the special education budget presentation.
Yeah, maybe we can
kind of,
talk
because I
about
think
that.
it's perfect time to have that
Yeah,
conversation, right?
absolutely.
Bring it back.
Yeah.
Jess, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and
Yeah.
thanks for all, putting up with all my questions.
No,
fine.
it was good. Thank you for doing the research.
Yeah.
So the subcommittee liaison updates, education subcommittee has an item.
Right, so this is just the second read and approval of the PHS new course proposals. We're not giving you the program of studies yet for a second read and approval because we're still working on the competency determination piece. But approving the course proposals allows Sharon to get them into the program of studies and format them appropriately. So
So-
when you get that document, it'll be a comprehensive document.
Can I get a motion to accept for second read and approval the PHS new course proposals?
So moved.
second.
So motion by Allison, seconded by Katrina. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, it's unanimous.
Natalie?
Natalie. I almost don't know what to do by not saying Natalie. Our next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight.
It is January 21st. Hopefully Ed Sub will meet. We're still working through some of the middle school pieces, but hopefully we'll have an update about the middle school program of studies. We are anticipating a school safety conversation with Chief McDonald, and School Resource Officer Simmons, both in public and in executive session. So
Okay.
2 pieces to
Great.
that.
Okay, so can I get a motion to enter executive session pursuant to Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy related to collective bargaining as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the legal position of the school committee as declared by the chair.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Katrina, seconded by Allison. By roll call vote, Katrina?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So we are in executive session.